It's 55 hours and 54 minutes into the mission. Apollo 13 is coasting through the void, 200,000 miles from home, moving steadily toward the moon. Inside the cramped command module, 3 astronauts have just finished a television broadcast for the folks back on Earth. Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Haise are settling into their evening routine. The mission has been quiet, almost too quiet. Some at NASA are calling it boring. None of them know that in exactly 1 minute, everything will change. Jack Swigert performs a routine procedure, stirring the cryogenic oxygen tanks to prevent the super-cold liquid from stratifying. He flips a switch. A dull bang echoes through the spacecraft, felt more than heard. The entire vehicle shudders. Warning lights illuminate across the instrument panel like a Christmas tree. Lovell looks at Haise. Haise looks at Swigert. In mission control, the telemetry screens are going haywire. Then comes the call that will echo through history. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." The oxygen is venting into space. Power is dropping. One fuel cell is dead, another dying. The command module, their ship home, is slowly suffocating. They're 3/4 of the way to the moon with no way to turn around quickly, no way to come home fast. This is no longer a mission to land on the moon. This is now a desperate fight for survival. 3 men, a crippled spacecraft, and the whole world watching, praying they'll make it home alive. The story of Apollo 13 begins not with an explosion, but with the dream of standing on the moon. By April 1970, NASA had already achieved the impossible, twice. Apollo 11 had put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the lunar surface in July 1969, fulfilling President Kennedy's audacious goal. Apollo 12 followed in November, proving the first landing wasn't a fluke. The American space program was hitting its stride, and the public's attention was already beginning to wander. Apollo 13 was supposed to be routine, the 3rd lunar landing, another stepping stone in humanity's conquest of space. It would target the Fra Mauro Highlands, a geologically significant region that promised to reveal secrets about the moon's formation. Commander Jim Lovell, a veteran of 3 previous spaceflights, including Apollo 8's historic orbit of the moon, would finally get his chance to walk on the lunar surface. The mission was assigned experienced astronauts, equipped with the same technology that had worked flawlessly before. Nobody expected this flight to be the one that would test NASA's limits like never before. The Cold War was still the defining reality of the era. Though the space race had been won with Apollo 11, the competition with the Soviet Union remained fierce. Every NASA mission was a demonstration of American technological superiority, a proof that democracy and free enterprise could achieve what totalitarian systems could not. The Apollo program represented the largest peacetime mobilization of resources in American history. At its peak, over 400,000 people worked on putting men on the moon. But by 1970, the political and public support was eroding. The Vietnam War was consuming resources and attention. Budget cuts were already being discussed. Apollo 13 flew in an atmosphere of changing priorities, where space exploration was increasingly seen as a luxury rather than a necessity. The astronauts and engineers knew that every mission had to succeed, not just technically, but politically and publicly. Failure wasn't an option, because the program itself might not survive it. This pressure, invisible but constant, added weight to every decision, every procedure, every launch. Apollo 13 spacecraft was a marvel of engineering, assembled from over 6 million parts. The command module, Odyssey, would house the crew during most of the flight and for re-entry. The service module contained oxygen, fuel cells for power, the main rocket engine, and all the consumables needed for the journey. The lunar module, Aquarius, was designed solely for landing 2 men on the moon, a delicate spider-like craft that would never be designed to fly through Earth's atmosphere. All of this sat atop the most powerful operational rocket ever built, the Saturn V, standing 363 feet tall and generating 7.6 million pounds of thrust. The technology was proven but complex, with thousands of potential failure points. Engineers had designed redundancy into critical systems, and backup systems for the backups. But no one had fully envisioned what would happen if multiple systems failed simultaneously far from Earth. The spacecraft was prepared for predictable problems. Apollo 13 would face the unpredictable. The spacecraft for Apollo 13 was assembled at North American Rockwell's facility in Downey, California. Command Module 109 rolled off the production line with hundreds of modifications based on lessons learned from previous flights. The service module, built by the same contractor, was a cylindrical section packed with the vital systems that would keep the crew alive and power the spacecraft. Inside were 2 oxygen tanks, 3 fuel cells that combined oxygen and hydrogen to produce electricity and water, tanks of helium and hydrogen, the service propulsion system engine, and 16 thrusters for attitude control. The lunar module, designated LM-7 and named Aquarius, was constructed by Grumman Aircraft on Long Island. It was the most fragile spacecraft ever built, its skin in places no thicker than aluminum foil, because every pound saved meant more time on the moon. The LM had its own life support, its own engine, its own power systems. It was designed to keep 2 men alive for 2 days on the lunar surface. Soon, it would be asked to do far more. During the manufacturing and testing process, small anomalies occurred that, in hindsight, would prove critical. In Oxygen Tank 2 of the service module, a fault developed with the tank's heating system. During pre-flight testing at Kennedy Space Center, this tank proved difficult to empty. The normal detanking procedure failed to drain it completely. To solve the problem, technicians decided to use the internal heaters to boil off the remaining oxygen, a procedure that was improvised and not standard. Unknown to everyone, this extended heating period caused damage to the Teflon insulation on the wires inside the tank. The thermostatic switches designed to prevent overheating had been manufactured for 28-volt systems, but NASA had upgraded the ground support equipment to 65 volts. These switches failed to open during the detanking procedure, allowing the temperature inside the tank to soar far beyond safe limits, potentially reaching 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The damaged insulation would later provide the spark for catastrophe. But in the busy weeks before launch, with thousands of systems to check, this one tank problem seemed resolved. The spacecraft was cleared for flight. James Arthur Lovell, Jr., the mission commander, was NASA's most experienced astronaut. At 42 years old, he had already flown on Gemini 7, Gemini 12, and Apollo 8. His 1968 journey around the moon on Apollo 8, humanity's first voyage to another world, had made him one of the most famous astronauts alive. Lovell was Navy through and through, an Academy graduate and test pilot who brought calm professionalism to every situation. He had logged more hours in space than any human being. His ultimate goal was to walk on the moon, something his Apollo 8 mission didn't allow. Apollo 13 was supposed to be his moment, the culmination of a career spent preparing for this achievement. Lovell was known for his even temperament and his ability to handle emergencies with ice-cold composure. His wife Marilyn had grown accustomed to the dangers. She'd been an astronaut's wife through the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo years. But she still worried, still watched every launch, still counted the days until splashdown. Lovell himself maintained the fighter pilot's necessary illusion of invincibility. He'd been in dangerous situations before and always made it home. John Leonard Jack Swigert, Jr. was the command module pilot, and he nearly wasn't on the mission at all. The original CMP was Ken Mattingly, but 3 days before launch, the crew was exposed to German measles through backup lunar module pilot Charlie Duke. Mattingly had no immunity to the disease. NASA's flight surgeons determined there was a real risk he'd become sick during the mission, a potentially catastrophic situation. The agonizing decision was made to replace him with his backup, Jack Swigert, just 72 hours before launch. Swigert, 38, was a bachelor, an Air Force pilot and aerospace engineer who had waited years for a flight assignment. He was brilliant, energetic, and slightly wild, known for his love of sports cars and dating. This was his first space flight, and he was stepping into the role with minimal time to train with Lovell and Haise. He spent the final hours before launch in the command module simulator, practicing procedures with his new crew. There were whispers that the late crew change was unlucky, that it disrupted the team's coordination. Swigert was determined to prove he belonged, that he could handle anything thrown at him. He had no idea how true that would become. Fred Haise Jr., the lunar module pilot, was 36 years old, and this was also his first spaceflight. A former Marine Corps pilot and NASA test pilot, Haise had spent years flying the lunar module simulator, preparing for this moment. He and Lovell were supposed to descend to the moon's surface together while Swigert orbited above. Haise had grown up during the Depression in Biloxi, Mississippi, the son of a railway worker. His journey to NASA represented the American dream, realized through talent, determination, and endless hours of work. He was married to Mary, and they had 4 children. The youngest was barely a year old. Haise took his responsibilities seriously, to his family, to his crew, to NASA, to the mission. He was quieter than Lovell or Swigert, more reserved, but deeply passionate about flying and exploration. The Apollo program had given him a purpose beyond anything he'd imagined as a kid watching the stars from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Walking on the moon would place him in history alongside Buzz Aldrin and Pete Conrad. It was everything he'd worked for. The 3 men, Lovell, Swigert, and Haise, formed a crew that was experienced yet untested together, professional but still getting to know each other's rhythms and instincts. April 11, 1970. Kennedy Space Center, Launch Complex 39A. The Saturn V rocket stands gleaming white against the Florida sky, its Apollo 13 designation painted in bold black letters. The weather is perfect, clear skies, light winds, 80 degrees. Thousands of spectators line the beaches and causeways, though the crowds are noticeably smaller than for Apollo 11. The novelty of moon missions is wearing off for the public, though not for those who understand what's being attempted. NASA personnel, launch crews, and press fill the viewing areas closer to the pad. The countdown has been proceeding smoothly through the night. Inside the spacecraft, 363 feet above the ground, Lovell, Swigert, and Haise lie on their backs in the command module, strapped into their couches. They've been there for hours, running through checklists, systems checks, comm checks. The cabin smells of new materials and electronics. Through the small windows, they can see the gantry being pulled back, the Atlantic Ocean in the distance. They joke with the closeout crew, the last people they'll see before leaving Earth. The same tension and excitement they felt dozens of times in simulations now has an edge. This time, it's real. At 2:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the countdown reaches 0. 5 F-1 engines ignite at the base of the Saturn V, each generating 1.5 million pounds of thrust. The sound is apocalyptic, a continuous roar that shakes the ground for miles. Flames erupt downward into the flame trench, deflecting outward in brilliant orange and white. The hold-down arms release. The rocket begins to rise, slowly at first, then faster, trailing a column of fire and white smoke. Inside the command module, the vibration is intense but not uncomfortable. The G-forces build steadily, 1.5 times normal gravity, then 2, then 3. Lovell, the veteran, remains calm. Swigert focuses on the instrument panel, monitoring every gauge. Haise feels his heart pounding, but keeps his voice steady on the radio. The clock is running, Lovell reports to Houston. The first stage burns for 2.5 minutes, lifting them to 40 miles altitude before separating. The second stage ignites instantly, 5 J2 engines continuing the push toward orbit. 9 minutes after launch, the third stage places them in Earth orbit. They're weightless now, floating against their restraints, looking down at the coast of Africa passing below. The first part is done. The hard part is yet to come. 2.5 hours after launch, the third stage reignites for translunar injection, the burn that will send them to the moon. The engine fires for 5.5 minutes, accelerating the spacecraft to 24,500 miles per hour, fast enough to break free of Earth's gravitational pull. They're committed now. There's no quick way home, no abort back to a landing site. The physics of orbital mechanics mean they must continue on a long arc around the moon before they can return. Swigert separates the command and service modules from the third stage, turns around, and docks with the lunar module, still housed in the adapter. The docking is clean, exactly as practiced. The joint spacecraft, now called the Apollo 13 stack, pulls away from the spent third stage. Earth is already beginning to shrink behind them, changing from the world they know into a blue and white sphere against the infinite black. The crew begins their flight plan in earnest. Navigation checks, systems monitoring, housekeeping chores. They remove their bulky spacesuits and stow them, changing into more comfortable flight suits. The cabin is cramped, but will be home for the next week. Everything is proceeding nominally, as NASA says. The mission is going exactly according to plan. The journey to the moon takes about 3 days. Apollo 13 coasts through space, its initial velocity gradually decreasing as Earth's gravity pulls back on it, but the moon's gravity slowly taking over. The spacecraft rotates slowly, a barbecue roll, to distribute the sun's heat evenly across the hull. Inside, the crew settles into the rhythm of spaceflight. They eat rehydrated food from plastic bags, sleep in shifts floating in the cramped cabin, perform scientific experiments, and send regular status reports to Houston. Lovell and Haise make jokes about the Fra Mauro Country Club waiting for them on the moon. Swigert familiarizes himself with every switch and circuit breaker in the command module. The first day passes uneventfully. On the second day, April 12, they broadcast a television transmission back to Earth, showing viewers around the command module and the lunar module. The TV networks don't carry it live. Moon missions are no longer news. This disappointment is mentioned, but the crew remains professional and enthusiastic. They're living the dream, even if the public has moved on. At 46 hours into the mission, the crew performs a standard procedure, a mid-course correction burn to refine their trajectory toward the moon. The service propulsion system engine fires for 23 seconds, adjusting their path by a fraction of a degree. The burn is perfect, the navigation is spot on. At 54 hours, they prepare for another television broadcast. This one is carried live, though the audience is small. Lovell and Haise enter Aquarius to give viewers a tour of the lunar module. They demonstrate how they'll maneuver on the moon, show the equipment they'll use. Swigert remains in Odyssey, monitoring systems. Fred Haise ends the broadcast with, "As you can see, we have a couple of happy, healthy crew members here on Apollo 13. They shut down the TV camera and return to routine operations. Lovell and Haise close the hatches and return to the command module. Swigert checks his flight plan. In less than 2 hours, they'll be scheduled to perform another routine task, stirring the cryogenic oxygen and hydrogen tanks to prevent the super-cold liquids from stratifying into layers. He finds the checklist item and waits for Houston to confirm the time. At ground elapsed time 55 hours, 53 minutes, and 18 seconds, 9:08 p.m. Houston time on April 13, Capcom Jack Loosma radios up to the spacecraft. 13, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like you to stir up your cryotanks. It's a mundane request, performed multiple times on every mission. The cryogenic oxygen and hydrogen are stored as super-cold liquids. Without stirring, the liquids can stratify, causing inaccurate quantity readings. Stirring activates fans inside the tanks, mixing the contents. Jack Swigert acknowledges. Okay. He reaches for the panel, finds the switches for hydrogen tank 1, hydrogen tank 2, oxygen tank 1, and oxygen tank 2. He flips them in sequence. In the service module, just behind the heat shield of the command module, fans inside the 4 tanks begin to spin. At exactly 55:54:53 ground elapsed time, oxygen tank 2 in the service module explodes. The damaged Teflon insulation on the wires inside has finally failed completely. A spark ignites in the pure oxygen environment. The tank is pressurized to nearly 1,000 pounds per square inch. The explosion is catastrophic. The tank ruptures. The bay that contains it, Bay 4 of the service module, is blown open. The force tears off a protective panel measuring 13 feet long. Debris and vapor stream into space. The entire spacecraft shudders violently. Inside the command module, the crew hears and feels a loud bang, then a muffled explosion. The vehicle rocks. Master alarm lights illuminate. Warning tones sound. Lovell's first thought is that a meteoroid has struck them, the only explanation that makes sense. Haise thinks maybe the lunar module has vented its atmosphere. Swigert stares at the instrument panel, watching gauges swing wildly. The crew can feel the spacecraft shaking, attitude thrusters firing continuously, trying to compensate for some unseen force. They have no idea what's happened. In mission control, the first indication is telemetry showing sudden pressure drops and voltage fluctuations. Jack Swigert, his voice remarkably calm, keys his microphone. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Capcom, Jack Lusma, not yet understanding the severity, responds, "This is Houston, say again please." Jim Lovell takes over. "Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt." The words are calm, professional, but they signal disaster. The main B bus is one of two primary electrical power distribution systems in the command module. It's running on low voltage, which means it's not getting power from the fuel cells that generate the spacecraft's electricity. Lovell, Swigert, and Haise begin scanning their instruments. What they see is terrifying. Fuel cell 3 is offline. Fuel cell 1 is showing low voltage and dropping. The oxygen pressure in tank 2 is reading 0, impossible unless the tank has failed completely. Tank 1 pressure is also dropping, though more slowly. The oxygen feeds the fuel cells. No oxygen means no fuel cells. No fuel cells means no power. No power means no life support, no computers, no propulsion, no way home. They're 200,000 miles from Earth in a dying spacecraft. In Houston, Flight Director Gene Kranz is not on duty. It's the overnight shift, and Glyn Lunney's team is manning the consoles. But within minutes, Kranz is called at home. He races back to mission control. The white team, his team, will be needed. As data streams in from the spacecraft, the scope of the disaster becomes clear. The service module has suffered a catastrophic failure. Oxygen tank 2 is gone. Tank 1 is venting into space through some rupture or failed valve. The oxygen is feeding out into the void. At the current rate, they have maybe 2 hours before all the oxygen is gone. Without oxygen, the fuel cells will die. Without fuel cells, the command module will have battery power only, enough for perhaps 10 hours if they're lucky. But the mission to the moon is scheduled to last several more days. The numbers don't work. The spacecraft commander and his crew are going to run out of power and oxygen long before they can reach Earth. This isn't a minor malfunction to be worked around. This is a potential death sentence. Aboard the spacecraft, Lovell floats to the left-hand window of the command module and looks back toward the service module. What he sees chills him to the bone. A vast cloud of gas venting into space from the side of the spacecraft, glittering in the sunlight like a constellation. "We are venting something out into space," he reports to Houston, his voice tight. It's oxygen, their life support, their power source, streaming away into the void. The command module's oxygen supply is separate, stored in 2 small surge tanks that feed the cabin atmosphere. But those won't last long. The crew has to make a decision, and fast. Gene Kranz, now in mission control, begins issuing orders. His famous phrase, "failure is not an option," doesn't need to be spoken. Everyone in the room knows what's at stake. The backroom teams, engineers from NASA and the contractors, are pulled in. What can we do? How can we save them? The first suggestion comes quickly. Shut down the command module to conserve power and use the lunar module as a lifeboat. The LM has its own oxygen, its own power, its own systems. It was built to keep 2 men alive for 2 days on the moon. Now it will have to keep 3 men alive for 4 days in space. The crew begins the process of shutting down Odyssey, the command module. Every non-essential system is powered off. The computer is shut down. The guidance platform is aligned one last time, then powered off. The cabin lights go dark. The spacecraft that was warm and humming with life becomes cold and silent. They keep only the most critical systems active, running on battery power. The plan is to preserve Odyssey for re-entry. They'll need it to come home through Earth's atmosphere. The lunar module can survive re-entry. It has no heat shield. But for now, for the long coast back to Earth, Aquarius will be their home. Lovell and Haise float through the docking tunnel into the lunar module and begin activating its systems. The LM was scheduled to be powered up tomorrow when they reached lunar orbit. Instead, they're bringing it online now, in an emergency, following checklists radioed up from Houston that are being written in real time by engineers on the ground. Swigert remains in Odyssey temporarily, monitoring the remaining systems, watching the oxygen pressure in Tank 1 slowly, inexorably dropping toward zero. In Houston, the mission planners are working the trajectory problem. Apollo 13 is already too far from Earth to simply turn around. The physics won't allow it. They're caught in what's called a free return trajectory. Their current path will swing them around the moon and send them back to Earth, but it will take days. Even worse, modifications made to their trajectory earlier in the mission mean they're no longer on a precise free return path. If they do nothing, they'll miss Earth entirely. They need to perform a burn with the spacecraft's engine to adjust their path. But which engine? The service propulsion system in the service module is the main engine, but the service module has been damaged by the explosion. No one knows if the SPS engine is safe to fire. It might blow up the spacecraft. The only other option is the lunar module's descent engine, a smaller engine designed for landing on the moon, not for maneuvers in deep space. It's a risky proposition, using the LM engine while the LM is still attached to the command and service modules. The mass and balance are all wrong, but it's the only option they have. At 61 hours ground elapsed time, about 5 hours after the explosion, the crew prepares for the first critical burn. Using the LM's descent engine, they'll perform what's called a pericynthian +2 burn, a maneuver designed to bring them around the moon and aim them back toward Earth. The calculations have been done and double-checked on the ground. The burn parameters are radioed up: duration, throttle setting, attitude. Lovell, now effectively flying the lunar module with the entire Apollo stack attached, must align the spacecraft properly without the benefit of the normal guidance computer. That was shut down in Odyssey to save power. He uses the LM's simpler guidance system, aligning the spacecraft by sighting on the Sun and Earth through the small windows. It's piloting by the seat of the pants, something these test pilots have trained for but never expected to do in space. At the precise moment, Lovell fires the descent engine. The burn lasts 35 seconds. The spacecraft accelerates, its trajectory bending slightly. The telemetry flows to Houston. When the engine shuts down, the analysts confirm they're on course to return to Earth. They won't miss the planet. But the landing point and time are still uncertain, and they still have to survive for days in a spacecraft that's dying around them. The crew is now committed to using Aquarius as a lifeboat, but a terrifying reality is setting in. The lunar module was never designed for this. It was built to support 2 men for 2 days. Now it must support 3 men for 4 days. The oxygen is sufficient, the LM has plenty of that, but the consumables are tight. Water is limited. The lithium hydroxide canisters that scrub carbon dioxide from the air are limited. Power from the LM's batteries is limited. Every system is running at the edge of its capacity. The temperature inside begins to drop. With the command module shut down and the LM running minimal power, there's not enough heat being generated to keep the cabin warm. The temperature falls to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The crew, in their lightweight flight suits, start to shiver. They can see their breath. Condensation forms on every surface: the walls, the windows, the instrument panels. Water droplets float through the cabin in the weightlessness. There's no way to stay dry or warm. They endure, knowing that comfort is the least of their concerns. Staying alive is all that matters. Another problem emerges, one that threatens to kill them just as surely as lack of power or oxygen. The carbon dioxide level in the cabin is rising. Every breath the crew exhales adds CO2 to the air. The lithium hydroxide canisters in the LM are designed to scrub CO2 from the air for 2 men for 2 days. With 3 men, the canisters are being depleted far faster than planned. By the time they reach Earth, the CO2 will rise to lethal levels. The crew will suffocate, poisoned by their own breathing. The command module has spare lithium hydroxide canisters, plenty of them. But there's a problem. The command module canisters are square, and the lunar module receptacles are round. They're not compatible. The crew can't use them. In mission control, a team is assembled with a single task: figure out how to fit a square peg in a round hole, using only materials available on the spacecraft. The engineers gather pieces that match what's aboard Apollo 13. Plastic bags, cardboard, tape, hoses from the spacesuits. They work for hours, trying different configurations. Finally, they devise a solution, a makeshift adapter using the cardboard covers of procedure manuals, plastic bags, and duct tape. The instructions are radioed up to the crew with a blueprint drawn in real time. Following the radioed instructions, the crew builds the adapter. They tape plastic bags around the square command module canisters, cut holes for airflow, attach hoses, and jury-rig the whole assembly into the lunar module's environmental system. It looks absurd, a contraption of cardboard and tape holding together the technology that will save their lives. But it works. The CO2 levels begin to drop. The crew can breathe freely again. It's one of the most inspired pieces of improvisation in the history of spaceflight, born from desperation and ingenuity. "We got tired of looking at each other," Lovell will later joke, but at the moment, there's no humor. There's only relief, and the knowledge that one more crisis has been averted. They still have to survive for days, still have to navigate back to Earth, still have to perform another burn to speed up their return, and still have to execute the most dangerous re-entry in history. But for now, they can breathe. As Apollo 13 swings around the far side of the moon on April 15th, the crew gets a brief, poignant view of their destination. Through the windows of the lunar module, they see the gray, cratered surface passing below. It's the closest any of them will ever come to the moon. Lovell, who has now traveled to the moon twice but will never land, looks down at Fra Mauro, the landing site they'll never reach. "Gentlemen, we just lost the moon," he says quietly. There's no bitterness in his voice, only acknowledgement of reality. They have more important concerns, getting home alive. The spacecraft passes behind the moon, losing radio contact with Earth for the period of time they're blocked by the lunar mass. It's lonely back there, more alone than any human has ever been, with 250,000 miles of void between them and home. When they emerge from behind the moon and regain contact, Houston is waiting. They have survived the long coast. Now comes the final challenge. The trajectory is still not quite right. Even with the burn performed hours after the explosion, Apollo 13 is on a path that will take over 5 days to reach Earth. Too long, consuming too much of the remaining consumables. More critically, the landing point is in the Indian Ocean, far from any recovery ships. They need to perform another burn to speed their return and shift the landing point to the Pacific, where the Navy has the carrier USS Iwo Jima waiting. This burn will be longer and more precise than the first, and it will have to be done with the lunar module's descent engine again, with the command and service modules still attached, a configuration that's never been tested, never simulated. The mass distribution is all wrong, the engine might not fire properly, the burn might send them off course. But there's no choice. At 105 hours ground elapsed time, about 2 hours after rounding the moon, the crew prepares for the burn. Lovell aligns the spacecraft using the same manual techniques as before, sighting on the sun, on Earth, on stars. The numbers are radioed up from Houston. Duration 4 minutes and 23 seconds. The burn is almost 5 times longer than the previous one. At the precise second, Lovell opens the throttle. The descent engine ignites. The spacecraft accelerates, pushed by the thrust. Inside the LM, the crew feels the gentle but steady pressure. 4 minutes is an eternity. Every second they're burning precious fuel. Every second they're hoping the engine continues firing, that nothing fails, that the trajectory calculations are correct. In mission control, the flight controllers watch the telemetry in silence. There's nothing they can do now but wait. The burn seems to last forever. Finally, at exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds, Lovell shuts down the engine. The spacecraft coasts in silence. The telemetry is analyzed. The trajectory is perfect. They're aimed at the Pacific. They'll reach Earth in about 2 days. The splashdown point is within range of the recovery ships. The burn was successful. A cheer erupts in mission control. It's the first good news in days. But the mission isn't over. The hardest part is still ahead. The crew endures the long coast back to Earth. They're exhausted, cold, and sick. Fred Haise has developed a urinary tract infection from the extreme cold and dehydration. His temperature spikes to 104 degrees. There's no medicine aboard that can help him. He shivers in pain, wrapped in whatever materials they can find. Sleep is nearly impossible. The spacecraft is so cold that ice forms on the walls. The crew takes turns sleeping in brief, uncomfortable periods, never fully resting. They're running on adrenaline and determination. Every hour that passes is an hour closer to home, but also an hour during which something else could go wrong. The lunar module, never designed for this extended use, could fail at any moment. The command module, cold and dormant, might not restart when they need it. The batteries might not have enough power for re-entry. Any of 1,000 things could still kill them. But they push forward because there's no alternative. They've come too far, survived too much to give up now. On April 17, 1970, Apollo 13 approaches Earth. The world is watching. The media has been covering every development. President Nixon has been briefed regularly. The Soviet Union, America's rival in the space race, has offered to help if needed, a remarkable gesture during the Cold War. Across the planet, people are praying for the 3 astronauts. In homes and churches and schools, humanity is united in hope that these men will make it home. The crew has one final task before they can reach safety: power up the command module and separate from the lunar module that has kept them alive. It's a delicate procedure. The command module has been shut down for days, frozen to near zero temperatures. Water has condensed on every surface. There's concern that when they apply power, the moisture could cause short circuits, destroying the electrical systems they need for re-entry. Engineers have devised a power-up sequence designed to minimize the risk, bringing systems online gradually, testing each one. Swigert, back in Odyssey, begins the process. Lovell and Haise assist, reading checklists that have been revised dozens of times on the ground and radioed up. One by one, the systems come online. The computer boots up, the guidance platform activates, the displays illuminate. There are some anomalies. Some systems don't respond exactly as expected, but nothing catastrophic. The command module is alive again. The crew transfers back into Odyssey, leaving Aquarius for the last time. The lunar module that saved their lives is now a liability, extra mass that will complicate re-entry. They seal the hatches between the 2 spacecraft. There's a moment of silent appreciation for the tiny, fragile machine that kept them breathing and warm enough to survive. Then, at the command from Houston, they jettison the service module. For the first time, they can see the full extent of the damage. The entire side of Bay 4 is missing, blown away by the explosion. Interior equipment is exposed to space. It's a miracle the spacecraft held together at all. Photos are taken, evidence of what happened, proof of what they survived. Then the service module drifts away into space, a tumbling wreck. Next, they jettison Aquarius. The lunar module, their lifeboat, is released. It drifts away slowly, its mission complete. Lovell radios, "Farewell Aquarius, and we thank you." The crew watches through the windows as the LM fades into the distance, becoming a speck, then vanishing. They're alone now in the command module, committed to re-entry. There's no turning back, no backup plan. The heat shield on the bottom of Odyssey must be intact. If the explosion damaged it, if the extreme cold has caused it to crack, they'll burn up during re-entry. There's no way to inspect it, no way to know for certain until they're in the atmosphere. They have to trust that it will hold. The crew straps into their couches. They've been awake for almost 2 days straight, running on fumes and willpower. But there's no time to rest. Re-entry is minutes away. Apollo 13 hits the top of Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. The command module orients itself heat shield first at a precise angle. Too steep and the G-forces will crush the crew, or the spacecraft will burn up. Too shallow and they'll skip off the atmosphere like a stone on water, bouncing back into space with no way to return. The angle must be perfect. The spacecraft begins to decelerate, friction with the atmosphere converting their velocity into heat. The heat shield glows red, then white-hot. The temperature on the outer surface reaches 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to vaporize metal. Inside the cabin, the crew feels the G-forces building, 4 times normal gravity, pressing them into their couches. They're breathing hard, unable to move. The windows are covered by a sheath of glowing plasma. The radio is blocked by ionization. For 4 minutes, there's no communication with Houston. The blackout is expected, but it's still terrifying. Mission Control waits, counting the seconds. If the heat shield failed, they'll never hear from the crew again. The 4 minutes of blackout stretch into forever. In Mission Control, the silence is complete. Everyone is staring at the countdown timer. The moment the communication should resume passes. Nothing. 5 seconds past the expected time. 10 seconds. Still nothing. 15 seconds. The flight controllers glance at each other, not willing to voice their fears. Has the heat shield failed? Are they gone? Then, at 17 seconds past the expected time, Jack Swigert's voice crackles through the speakers. "Okay, Joe." Mission Control erupts in cheers, applause, tears. The crew survived re-entry. 3 huge parachutes deploy from the top of the command module, snapping open in sequence. The spacecraft, which moments ago was screaming through the atmosphere at hypersonic speed, slows to a gentle descent. Through the windows, Lovell, Swigert, and Haise see blue sky, white clouds, the beautiful Pacific Ocean rising to meet them. They're home. They've made it. At 12:07 p.m. Central Standard Time on April 17, 1970, Apollo 13 splashes down in the Pacific Ocean, 4 miles from the aircraft carrier USS Iwo Jima. Navy helicopters are airborne within minutes, racing to the bobbing capsule. Swimmers jump into the water, attach flotation collars to keep Odyssey upright. The crew, exhausted beyond measure, pop the hatch and breathe fresh air for the first time in nearly 6 days. The swimmers help them into a life raft, then into a helicopter. As the helicopter lifts off, Lovell, Swigert, and Haise look down at the spacecraft that brought them home, battered, scarred, but intact. Odyssey floats on the waves, mission complete. Within the hour, the crew is aboard the Iwo Jima. They're weak, dehydrated, and cold, but alive. Medical teams examine them. Haise is treated for his infection. All 3 have lost significant weight, but they're intact, mentally sharp, ready to face the world. The ship's crew lines the deck, cheering wildly. The 3 astronauts, wrapped in blankets, wave and smile weakly. They've been to hell and back, and they've made it home. The world rejoices. News of Apollo 13's safe return spreads instantly across the globe. Television networks interrupt regular programming with the splashdown footage. Newspapers print special editions with massive headlines, "Apollo 13 safe." In Times Square, crowds cheer. In Moscow, despite Cold War tensions, Soviet newspapers praise the rescue. Messages of congratulations pour into NASA from world leaders. President Nixon calls the crew aboard the Iwo Jima personally, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to call you personally and tell you how proud we are," he says. The astronauts, in their typical understated style, thank the president and credit the team in Houston. Gene Kranz and his flight controllers are hailed as heroes. The engineers who devised the CO2 scrubber adapter, the trajectory calculations, the power-up sequences, all receive recognition. But Kranz demurs. This was a team effort, he insists. And it was. From the astronauts to the backroom engineers to the contractors to the recovery forces, thousands of people worked together to bring Apollo 13 home. The investigation begins immediately. What caused the explosion? Could it have been prevented? Engineers at NASA examine the telemetry data, interview everyone involved in manufacturing and testing, reconstruct the events leading to the failure. Within weeks, the culprit is identified, oxygen tank 2, and specifically the damaged Teflon insulation caused by the overheating during ground testing when the faulty thermostatic switches failed to limit temperature. The tank should never have been cleared for flight, but in the pressure to maintain the schedule, in the complexity of managing thousands of components, the warning signs were missed. NASA implements sweeping changes. Oxygen tanks are redesigned. Testing procedures are overhauled. A third oxygen tank is added to the service module for redundancy. The Apollo program continues, but with renewed emphasis on safety and redundancy. Apollo 13 didn't land on the moon, but it provided lessons that would keep future crews safe. The crew returns to Houston for a hero's welcome. Ticker tape parades are held in Chicago and New York. They meet the president at the White House. They appear on television, telling their story. But all three men process the experience differently. Lovell, who came so close to walking on the moon only to have it snatched away, maintains his characteristic calm. He's proud of what they accomplished, survival against impossible odds. He'll never fly in space again, his astronaut career ending not with a moon landing, but with a successful rescue. Jack Swigert, the bachelor who almost didn't fly the mission, becomes something of a celebrity. He'll eventually enter politics, elected to Congress from Colorado, though he'll die of cancer before taking his seat. Fred Haise, the youngest, recovers from his infection and returns to flight status. He'll command space shuttle approach and landing tests, but will never fly in space again. The three men remain bonded for life by what they endured together. Apollo 13 is often called NASA's successful failure. It didn't achieve its primary objective, landing on the moon, but it demonstrated something perhaps more valuable: the space agency's ability to improvise, adapt, and overcome catastrophic failures. The mission became a case study in crisis management, problem-solving under pressure, and teamwork. Businesses and organizations around the world study Apollo 13 as an example of how to respond to emergencies. Gene Kranz's leadership during the crisis became legendary. His methodical approach, define the problem, gather data, consider options, make a decision, execute, is taught in management schools. The phrase attributed to him, "failure is not an option," even though he never actually said those words during the mission, captures the spirit of determination that saved the crew. The technologies and procedures developed during the Apollo 13 rescue influenced all future human spaceflight. The Space Shuttle program incorporated lessons about redundancy and abort modes. The International Space Station was designed with multiple backup systems and multiple paths for crew return. When SpaceX and other commercial companies began designing crew vehicles, they studied Apollo 13 to understand how things could go wrong and how to build in resilience. The mission proved that space travel would always be dangerous, that perfect safety is impossible, but that careful planning, excellent training, and brilliant improvisation can overcome even catastrophic failures. The lunar module manufacturers at Grumman Aircraft took out an advertisement after the mission that read, "We designed the LM to land on the moon. We never dreamed it would have to fly through the far side of the moon, act as a lifeboat, and bring 3 men home safely." It was a testament to over-engineering and safety margins. Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haise became permanent figures in space history. Lovell published a book about the mission, Lost Moon, which became the basis for the 1995 film Apollo 13, directed by Ron Howard and starring Tom Hanks. The movie introduced the mission to a new generation and became one of the most accurate depictions of spaceflight ever filmed. NASA provided extensive technical support for the production, and the film's success reignited public interest in the Apollo program. Decades later, people still know the story. They know the phrase, "Houston, we've had a problem." They know about the CO2 scrubber made of duct tape and cardboard. They know that 3 men survived 4 days in a spacecraft that was falling apart around them. The mission failed to land on the moon, but it succeeded in demonstrating something more important: human resilience, ingenuity, and courage. Apollo 13 stands as a monument to human achievement, not because it succeeded in its goal, but because it survived its failure. The mission reminds us that exploration is inherently risky, that venturing into the unknown means accepting danger, but that preparation, training, intelligence, and teamwork can overcome even the most desperate circumstances. 3 men went to the moon and didn't land there, but they came home alive against odds that should have killed them. In that survival lies a different kind of triumph. The engineers and flight controllers who worked around the clock, who invented solutions on the spot, who refused to give up on the crew, they demonstrated what humans are capable of when lives are on the line. Apollo 13 proved that NASA's greatest strength wasn't its rockets or its computers, but its people. The mission showed that when we work together, when we refuse to accept defeat, when we apply our intelligence and creativity to solving problems, there's very little we can't accomplish. Today, as we plan to return to the Moon with the Artemis program and eventually journey to Mars, the lessons of Apollo 13 remain relevant. Every mission planner, every astronaut, every engineer knows the story and takes inspiration from it. The mission taught NASA to plan for the unplannable, to build in redundancy and flexibility, to train crews not just for nominal operations, but for the worst-case scenarios. It taught that success in space requires not just technical excellence, but also creativity, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to give up. Jim Lovell once said, "There are people who make things happen, there are people who watch things happen, and there are people who wonder what happened. To be successful, you need to be a person who makes things happen." Apollo 13 was the ultimate example of making things happen against impossible odds. The crew and the team on the ground made history not by landing on the Moon, but by refusing to let 3 men die in space. That determination, that human spirit, is what makes us capable of exploring the cosmos. Apollo 13 didn't fail. It succeeded in the most important way possible. It brought everyone home. Apollo 13 transformed disaster into triumph through courage, ingenuity, and the refusal to accept failure. 3 men journeyed to the Moon and fought their way back against impossible odds. They proved that human beings, when tested to their absolute limits, possess reserves of strength, intelligence, and determination that can overcome even the void of space. The mission failed to land on the Moon, but it succeeded in demonstrating what NASA does best, saving lives through brilliant engineering and teamwork. Apollo 13 remains the standard for crisis management, the inspiration for never giving up, and a reminder that exploration demands risk but rewards us with knowledge about ourselves. Thank you for watching this story of NASA's most heroic rescue. If you enjoyed learning about Apollo 13's incredible journey, please subscribe to our channel for more true stories from space history. Hit the like button and leave a comment about which NASA mission you'd like to hear about next. Next time, we'll explore another remarkable chapter in human spaceflight, how the Apollo 1 fire changed everything NASA knew about safety, and the 3 astronauts who gave their lives so others could reach the Moon. As Gene Kranz said after Apollo 13, when bad things happened, we just calmly laid out all the options, and failure was not one of them. We never panicked, and we never gave up on finding a solution. That spirit continues to drive us toward the stars.